Viewer discretion is advised. This presentation details mythological events of extreme violence and graphic transformation. The themes discussed are intense and may not be suitable for all audiences. It begins with the twisting of flesh, a grotesque contortion that defies the laws of nature. First, the body shudders, a violent spasm that turns the hero into a monster. His hair bristles like thorns, and on the tip of each strand, a single drop of blood appears. One of his eyes sucks itself deep into his skull, a dark pit of shadow. The other swells and bulges from its socket, a raw red orb the size of a fist, staring in all directions at once. His mouth peels back to his ears, a horrifying grin revealing jaws that could crush stone. A geyser of black blood erupts from the crown of his head, spraying into the clouds like the dark smoke of a volcano. His bones and sinews rearrange themselves, his neck swells, and his muscles bulge into unnatural, terrifying shapes. He is no longer human. He is a primal force of destruction, a living embodiment of war frenzy known as the ríastrad, the warp-spasm. This creature, this unholy terror, is not the villain of our story. He is the hero. He is Ireland's greatest champion, their ultimate protector, a warrior who stood alone against entire armies. But the most shocking fact of all, the first time this monstrous transformation took hold of him, he was only 7 years old. This is the story of a boy who was given a choice: a long, quiet life of obscurity, or a short, violent life of eternal glory. He chose glory, and in doing so, he became a weapon, a demigod haunted by prophecy, and a tragic figure whose rage was matched only by his sorrow. How does a child become the most feared warrior in a nation's history? And what terrible price did he pay for a name that would echo through eternity? To understand the monster, we must first meet the boy. Before he was known by his famous title, he had a different name, Sétanta. He was born into a world of myth and magic, a land ruled by warrior kings and influenced by the whims of ancient gods. His mother was Dictyr, the sister of the powerful King Concobar mac Nessa, ruler of Ulster. But his father was no mortal man. Legends say he was sired by Luff of the Long Arm, the god of light, oaths, and craftsmanship, one of the most powerful deities in the entire Irish pantheon. Sétanta was a demigod born of two worlds, with the divine fire of the gods flowing through his mortal veins. He was Ireland's Hercules, a child destined for greatness from the moment he drew his first breath. But destiny is a patient predator. Sétanta's early years were spent far from the battlefield, in the idyllic plains of Muir-Themne. Yet, even as a toddler, stories of the legendary Red Branch Knights reached him. These were the king's elite warriors, a mythological special forces unit stationed at the capital of Emain Machu. They were the best of the best, and Sétanta, with the blood of a god in him, knew he belonged among them. At the age of just 5, he decided his quiet life was over. He fashioned a toy shield from a branch, a toy spear from a stick, and a ball and hurley, a traditional Irish field hockey stick. And then he set off alone on foot for the king's court. When he finally arrived at Emain Macha, he saw a sight that filled him with a warrior's joy. 150 of the king's foster boys were out on the playing field, engaged in a fierce game of hurling. Without a moment's hesitation, the 5-year-old Sétanta ran onto the field and, through sheer speed and skill, took the ball and single-handedly drove it past all of them, scoring a goal. The other boys were stunned. Who was this stranger who had so brazenly interrupted their game and humiliated them? Enraged, they saw him not as a child, but as an intruder. All 150 of them turned on him at once. They threw their hurling balls at him, a volley of hard wooden projectiles that would have killed any normal child. But Sétanta was not normal. He deflected every single ball with his tiny shield and hurley. Then they cast their spears. He dodged and swatted them all aside. Finally, the entire troop of boys charged him, a wave of bodies meant to crush him under their weight. And it was here for the first time that a flicker of the monster within awoke. A primal fury filled the 5-year-old. His body tensed and he let out a roar. He threw himself into the crowd of older, bigger boys, his toy hurley swinging like a weapon of war. He laid out 50 of them before the chaos caught the attention of the king himself. King Concobar, his uncle, rushed out to see what was happening. He saw the small boy, a whirlwind of fury, single-handedly dismantling his entire youth platoon. The king intervened, stopping the fight and demanding to know who this ferocious child was. Sétanta, calming himself, introduced himself as his nephew. But even then, facing the most powerful king in the land, the boy showed no fear. He showed something else, an unbreakable sense of honor. He declared that he had been attacked unfairly, 150 against 1, and that it was his right to seek single combat against each of them in turn. The king and the other nobles were astounded. This wasn't just a gifted child. This was a warrior born, a boy who already understood the intricate codes of combat and honor better than most grown men. The king, seeing the truth in his claim, declared that Sétanta was now under his personal protection. He took the boy in, placing him in the care of the greatest poets, druids, and warriors of the Red Branch. Sétanta excelled at everything. He was the wisest in council, the most cunning at strategy, and the most ferocious in mock combat. He was the perfect prodigy, the future champion of Ulster in the making. For a few short years, it seemed his destiny was one of pure, untarnished glory. But his idyllic training was about to come to a violent and bloody end. An invitation was extended from a man named Cuchulainn, the master smith of Ulster, whose forge created the most powerful weapons in the kingdom. He invited King Concobar and his retinue to a great feast at his fort. The king, proud of his prodigious nephew, asked Sétanta to join them. But the boy was in the middle of a hurling match, once again single-handedly defeating all 150 of his peers. He told the king to go on ahead, promising he would follow once the game was finished. It was a simple, innocent promise, but it was a promise that would lead him directly into the jaws of a legendary beast, force him to kill for the first time, and burden him with a new name, a name that would become both his glory and his curse. The boy Sétanta was about to die, and in his place a legend would be born. The feast was in full swing at the fortress of Cuchulainn, the master smith of Ulster. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of roasted boar and the sound of boisterous laughter. King Concobar mac Nessa sat at the head table, raising a horn of mead, his Red Branch knights, the elite warriors of the kingdom, regaling each other with tales of their own valor. It was a celebration of craftsmanship and power, a gathering of the most important men in the land. And in the midst of the revelry, the king had made a fatal mistake. He had forgotten the boy. He had forgotten his own nephew, Sétanta. Miles away, the 7-year-old was finishing his games. Having single-handedly defeated the entire boy troop of Emain Machu, he decided it was time to follow the king as promised. But he wouldn't just run to the feast. That was too simple. Instead, he picked up his hurley, a curved wooden stick like a field hockey stick carved for war, and his slitter, a ball as hard as a rock. He struck the ball, sending it soaring high into the twilight sky. Then he sprinted, his small legs a blur, moving with an unnatural speed that defied his age. He ran so fast that he caught the ball before it ever touched the ground. He repeated this over and over, a mesmerizing, impossible game of catch with himself, covering miles of Irish countryside without ever breaking his stride. This wasn't just a game. It was a display of the divine power humming in his veins, a prelude to the legend he was about to become. Back at the fortress, Cuchulainn the smith approached King Concobar. "My king," he said, his voice deep and resonant like the striking of his own hammer. "I must secure my home for the night. With your permission, I will release my hound." Concobar, his mind clouded with mead and celebration, nodded. "Of course, Cuchulainn. The boy I was waiting for has surely decided not to come." And so the gate was barred, the locks were thrown, and the hound was unleashed. You have to understand, this was no ordinary dog. This was a beast of legend, a creature bred for one purpose: to kill anything and anyone that dared to cross the threshold of Cuchulainn's fortress uninvited. It was said to be the size of a full-grown calf, with jaws that could snap a man's leg like a twig. Its eyes burned with a malevolent fire, and its growl was the sound of rocks grinding together in the belly of the earth. It was a monster, a living, breathing weapon that knew no master but Cuchulainn and no mercy for intruders. The smith's vast wealth, his masterpieces of bronze and iron, were safer behind this one creature than behind 100 armed guards. The hound was let loose to roam the perimeter, a shadow of death patrolling the walls. It was then that Sétanta arrived. He saw the fortress looming, heard the faint sounds of merriment from within, and without a second thought, continued his game, smacking his ball towards the gate. But his game was interrupted. A sound ripped through the night air. a guttural, blood-freezing roar that stopped the boy in his tracks. From the shadows, the beast emerged. Its massive form blotted out the moonlight. Saliva dripped from its fangs, each one a dagger. It saw the small boy, the intruder, and charged. Inside, the warriors heard the terrifying sounds. First, the savage barking of the hound, a sound they all knew and feared. Then the high-pitched shout of a child. And then silence. A heavy, dreadful silence. King Concobar's face went pale. He leaped to his feet, the realization crashing down on him. "By the gods!" he whispered, his voice filled with horror. "The boy! My sister's son!" The Knights of the Red Branch drew their swords, their celebration turning to ash in their mouths. They believed they were rushing out to avenge a child's death, to find nothing left but a few scraps of cloth and blood on the grass. Cuchulainn himself was ashen-faced, knowing the brutal finality of his hound's attack. They unbarred the gate and threw it open, expecting a scene of utter carnage. But what they saw defied belief. The monstrous hound, the unkillable guardian of Cuchulainn's keep, lay dead on the ground, its massive body still. And standing over it, breathing heavily, was the small boy Sétanta. In one hand he held his hurley, in the other, his slitter, now covered in blood and gore. He was completely unharmed. A wave of relief washed over the men, followed immediately by stunned disbelief. How could a child do this? Concobar rushed forward and swept the boy into his arms, overjoyed that he was alive. But the joy was short-lived. Cuchulainn the smith stared at the corpse of his guardian, and his face, once filled with fear for the boy, now twisted in grief and anger. "The boy is welcome," Cuchulainn said, his voice dangerously low, "for he is the king's own blood. But his coming has brought me ruin." He gestured to the dead hound. "That beast was my life. It guarded my forge, my family, my fortune. My herds are now vulnerable, my home is unprotected. Its loyalty and strength can never be replaced. You have taken the guardian of my house, boy. What could possibly make up for such a loss?" The hall fell silent. The great warriors of Ulster had no answer. This was a matter of honor, a debt that had to be paid. And in that moment, the boy Sétanta showed a wisdom and maturity far beyond his 7 years. He stepped away from the king and stood before the grieving smith. His voice, though still a child's, was clear and steady, ringing with an authority that no one expected. "There is no need for such sorrow," Sétanta declared. "I will make this right. I myself will be your hound." A murmur went through the crowd. What did he mean? The boy continued, his gaze locked with Cuchulainn's. "Find a pup from the same litter as your great hound. I will raise it myself. I will train it to be as strong, as fierce, and as loyal as the one I have slain. It will be a guardian worthy of your name." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "And until that dog is grown and ready to take its place, I will stand guard. I will be the protector of your cattle, your forge, and your home. I will let no one pass these walls without your permission. I will be your shield." This was an oath of incredible gravity. For a boy destined for glory, the nephew of the king, to pledge himself to the life of a guard dog, it was an unheard of sacrifice. It was an act of pure, unshakable honor. The great druid Cathbad, the king's advisor and Sétanta's own grandfather, stepped forward from the crowd. His ancient eyes surveyed the scene. The dead monster, the grieving smith, and the small boy making a man's vow. He raised his hand, and a hush fell over everyone. "From this day forward," Cathbad proclaimed, his voice echoing with mystic power, "your name will no longer be Sétanta. Your deed and your oath have forged you a new identity. You will be known as Cú Chulainn." Cú Chulainn. In the old tongue, it meant the Hound of Cuchulainn. The name settled over the boy like a mantle. It was a badge of honor, a testament to his first great impossible feat of strength, but it was also a chain, a constant reminder of the life he took, and the solemn vow that now bound his destiny. He was no longer just a boy. He was a guardian, a protector, a living weapon pledged in service. The name was his glory, but it was also his burden. He had proven his strength by killing a beast. Now his honor demanded he take its place. Sétanta was gone, lost to the blood-soaked ground outside the fortress. Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Cuchulainn, had been born, and this new name would follow him into the heart of 1,000 battles, a name that would be shouted in triumph by his allies and whispered in terror by his enemies. He had a new purpose, forged in violence and sealed with a sacred oath. But this was only the first kill, the first vow. The path of a hero is a lonely one, and to protect his people, the Hound of Ulster would soon have to learn to unleash a monster far more terrifying than the one he had just slain, the one that slept inside himself. This monster was not a metaphor. It was a physical, grotesque transformation, a battle fury so absolute it twisted his body into something unrecognizable. The Celts called it the ríastrad, the warp-spasm, and when it took him, the boy Sétanta vanished completely. His body would contort, sucking one eye deep into his skull while the other bulged out, red and raw. His mouth would peel back to his ears, his jaw unhinging as a terrible foam frothed from his throat. His hair would stand on end, each strand like a razor-sharp wire, and on the tip of each wire, a single drop of blood would gleam. His muscles would swell and writhe under his skin, his very skeleton shifting, his joints turning backwards. From the crown of his head a column of dark blood would erupt, a geyser of pure rage that towered into the sky. In this state he knew neither friend nor foe, only the red thirst for destruction. The men of Ulster saw this power, and they were terrified. This wasn't just a skilled warrior. This was a force of nature, an earthquake in human form. King Concobar knew that such a weapon left untamed was as dangerous to Ulster as it was to its enemies. The boy needed a master. He needed someone who could teach him not just how to fight, but how to control the cataclysm that churned within his soul. There was only one person in the known world capable of such a task, the warrior woman Scathack, the shadowy one, who lived in a fortress on the Isle of Skye, in the land of Alba. To reach her was a trial in itself, a journey designed to break any who were not worthy. Kú Chulainn traveled across the sea and ventured into a land of perpetual twilight. He had to cross the plain of ill luck, where sharp reeds grew that could pierce a man's feet and hold him fast, and sticky bogs that would swallow a traveler whole. He survived. He then came to the perilous glen, a dark valley filled with devouring beasts, and he fought his way through them. Finally, he stood before the ultimate test, the Bridge of Leaps. It was a narrow, impossibly high arch that spanned a chasm of unknown depth. When anyone tried to cross it, the bridge would buck and narrow, throwing them into the abyss. Many had tried, all had failed. 3 times Kú Chulainn attempted to cross. 3 times he was thrown back, bruised and bloodied. But on his 4th attempt, as the bridge rose to cast him off, he did not retreat. He summoned his hero's light, took a running start, and performed his legendary salmon leap, soaring through the air and landing perfectly on the other side. He had passed the final test. Before him stood Dú Scaith, the Fortress of Shadows. It was here he met another warrior who had also braved the trials, Ferdiad, a prince of Connacht. Ferdiad was Kú Chulainn's equal in almost every way, strong, proud, and fiercely skilled. They were rivals from the first moment, but a deep respect grew between them. They became more than friends, they became sworn brothers, sharing every secret, every meal, every hardship. They trained together under Scathack's unforgiving eye, pushing each other to new heights of martial prowess. Scathack was no gentle teacher. She was a master of every weapon, every strategy, every secret art of war. She taught Kú Chulainn the thunder feat, the apple feat, the sword edge run, and the pole vault over shields. She honed his body into a perfect weapon and his mind into a razor-sharp tactical instrument. But she saw the ríastrad simmering just beneath his skin. She knew he possessed a power that went beyond skill, and for that, she reserved her most terrible lesson. She took him to a dark forge, deep beneath her fortress. There she revealed her secret weapon, a spear of such horrifying design that its very existence was a whispered legend. It was the Gae Bolg, the belly spear. Forged from the bone of a great sea monster, it was a weapon that could only be thrown with the foot from the water. Once it entered a man's body, it was unstoppable. But its true horror was what happened next. Upon impact, 30 barbs would explode outwards from the spear's head, shredding every organ, every vein, every muscle from the inside out. It was a weapon that didn't just kill, it annihilated. There was no defense against it. There was no surviving it. It was a sentence of death, and Scathack taught Kú Chulainn, and only Kú Chulainn, how to deliver it. As his training neared its end, he learned that Scathack was locked in a bitter war with a rival warrior queen, a woman of terrifying power and skill named Aoife. Many believed Aoife to be Scathack's equal, perhaps even her superior. As Scathach prepared her warriors for a decisive battle, she forbade Cú Chulainn from joining them. She feared his recklessness, feared that Aoife would kill the greatest student she had ever trained. To ensure his obedience, she gave him a powerful sleeping draught mixed into his drink. But Cuchulainn's constitution was so immense that a potion that would put a normal man to sleep for a full day only held him for a single hour. He awoke to the sounds of battle raging in the distance. Enraged at being left behind, he grabbed his weapons and sprinted to the battlefield, arriving just as Scathach's two sons were cut down by Aoife herself. Cú Chulainn let out a roar of fury and challenged the warrior queen to single combat. Aoife was a fearsome sight, a champion who had never known defeat. They clashed, and the sound of their swords was like the ringing of 1,000 anvils. They were perfectly matched. For every blow Cú Chulainn landed, Aoife returned another. For every feint a parry. He realized that he could not beat her with strength alone. He had to use his mind. Knowing that Aoife's greatest pride was her chariot and her two magnificent horses, Cú Chulainn suddenly cried out in mock horror, pointing behind her. "Look!" he shouted. "Your chariot and horses! They've fallen over the cliff." For a single fatal second, Aoife's instinct betrayed her. She turned her head to look. In that instant, Cú Chulainn was upon her. He dropped his sword, wrapped his arms around her, lifted her into the air, and carried her back to his side of the battlefield. He threw her to the ground and held his dagger to her throat. She was defeated. "Grant me a boon. Spare my life," she pleaded. "It is spared," he answered, "on 3 conditions. You will cease your war with Scathach and make peace forever. You will provide hostages to her as a guarantee. And," he added, looking at the formidable warrior before him, "you will bear me a son." Aoife agreed to all his terms. Cú Chulainn had done the impossible. He had not only mastered the arts of the greatest warrior alive, but he had single-handedly ended her war and defeated her unconquerable rival. He was no longer just a boy with a terrible rage. He was a champion, a strategist, a hero whose name was now whispered with awe across the islands. His training was complete. But as he stood at the peak of his power in that land of shadow, a cold wind began to blow from the west. A messenger arrived, breathless and weary from a long sea journey. The news he carried was grim. Back in Ireland, a storm was gathering. A proud and ambitious Queen Medb of Connacht was assembling the largest army the land had ever seen. Her gaze was fixed on Ulster, and on a single prize, the great brown bull of Cooley. The men of Ulster were afflicted by an ancient curse, leaving them as weak as women in their hour of greatest need. The border was undefended. The entire kingdom lay vulnerable. An army of thousands was marching to burn it to the ground, and the only thing standing in their way was a single 17-year-old boy. The real war was about to begin. The dust rose first, a brown cloud on the horizon that slowly resolved into the glint of 100,000 spear points. It was the army of Ireland, a vast, crawling serpent of iron and ambition, led by Queen Medb of Connacht. They marched with the confidence of conquerors, expecting to find a kingdom of sleeping warriors and undefended towns. They expected plunder, glory, and the grandest prize of all, the brown bull of Cooley. What they did not expect was the boy waiting for them at the border fort of Adh Gabla. Cú Chulainn stood alone, his chariot and his loyal driver, Leg, hidden in the trees behind him. He didn't see an army. He saw a challenge. He saw a violation. This was his land, his people, and he was the sworn shield of Ulster. He wasn't old enough to grow a full beard, but the fire in his eyes was ancient. As the vanguard of Medb's army approached the river, a single champion rode forward, laughing. He was a giant of a man, clad in bronze, his reputation preceding him. He was there to scout, to be the first to cross into the heart of Ulster. Cú Chulainn didn't shout. He didn't announce himself. He simply loaded his sling. The stone was a perfectly smooth river rock, chosen with care. He drew back, a blur of motion, and released. The stone didn't just fly. It screamed through the air, a whisper of death that arrived before its own sound. It struck the champion square in the forehead with such impossible force that it punched straight through his skull and out the back of his helmet, taking his life and his laughter with it. The giant toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the water. Silence fell over the front ranks of the army. They stared at the lone figure on the other side of the river. Who was this? Some phantom? Some trick of the light? A second scout, braver or perhaps just more foolish than the first, spurred his horse into the ford. Another stone flew, another perfect lethal shot. The second man fell. Then a third. And a fourth. For champions, for stones, for bodies now staining the river red. The advance ground to a halt. Cuchulainn finally moved. He strode to the edge of the water and drove the trunk of a young oak tree into the riverbed like a spear. Using his blade, he carved a message into the wood in Agam, the ancient Irish script. The message was a challenge, a declaration of ancient law. It proclaimed that no army could pass this fort until one of their champions could defeat him in single combat. Queen Meb was furious. Her entire invasion, thousands of the greatest warriors in Ireland, held at bay by a single arrogant boy invoking some half-forgotten custom of honor. Her advisors, however, warned her. To ignore such a challenge was to lose face, to show her army that their queen had no respect for the old ways. It would sow dissent and be seen as a sign of weakness. Besides, they reasoned, how long could one boy last? Send a champion. Let him kill the boy and be done with it. So they did. The first champion was a warrior named Nad Crantail. He was a mountain of a man who carried 9 javelins made of sharpened holly. He strode into the ford, boasting that he would take the boy's head as a souvenir. Cuchulainn, by contrast, looked almost like a child. He carried only his simple spear and shield. As Nad Crantail hurled his javelins one after another, Cuchulainn didn't block them. He dodged them. He weaved and jumped, moving with a supernatural grace, letting the deadly spears fly harmlessly past. When the champion was out of weapons, Cuchulainn simply walked up to him, and with a single contemptuous strike ended the duel. The next day, another champion, and another death. And the day after that, every morning, Meb's army would wake to find Cuchulainn waiting at the ford. Every day they would send their best, their bravest, their most celebrated fighters. And every evening, they would drag a body back to their camp. The boy seemed tireless, invincible. He fought with a spear. He fought with a sword. He fought with nothing but his bare hands. He was a whirlwind of destruction, a master of every form of combat. Meb's frustration boiled into rage. This wasn't a battle, it was a humiliation. Her invasion timetable was in ruins. Her army's morale was plummeting. The men began to whisper. They called the boy the Hound of Cuchulainn. They said he wasn't human. They said his father was a god, and that the Morrigan, the goddess of war, flew over his shoulder in the form of a crow, shrieking for their blood. Fear began to creep into the camp, a cold dread that no campfire could warm. Being chosen to fight the Hound was no longer an honor. It was a death sentence. Desperate, Meb and her husband Ailill decided to cheat. They sent a warrior named Lugaid, but secretly tasked 100 of their men to hide downstream and ambush Cuchulainn from behind once the duel began. But they underestimated their opponent. Cuchulainn's senses were as sharp as his spear. He heard the rustle in the reeds, saw the glint of 100 hidden helmets in the morning sun. He didn't wait for the trap to be sprung. In the middle of his duel with Lugaid, he unleashed the warp-spasm. His body began to contort. One eye sucked back into his skull, the other bulged out red and raw. His mouth stretched from ear to ear, his teeth bared like a wolf. His muscles swelled and twisted under his skin, and his hero light, a blinding aura of pure rage, erupted from the crown of his head. He became a monster, a primal force of war. He killed Lugaid, and then, with a roar that shook the very mountains, he leaped from the ford and fell upon the 100 hidden ambushers. It wasn't a fight, it was a slaughter. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat, his Gae Bolg, the terrible barbed spear, tasting blood for the first time in the war. He left 100 broken bodies in the field as a message to the Queen. Do not cheat. The war had now been raging for months, but the army of Ireland had not advanced a single mile into Ulster. They were trapped at that ford, held hostage by the honor they were forced to show and the terrifying demon who enforced it. Cuchulainn was wounded, exhausted, sleeping in snatched moments with his head on a stone and his spear in his hand. But he did not yield. He was the wall. He was the shield. He was the living embodiment of Ulster's defiance. Meb knew she couldn't win this way. Brute force was failing. Trickery was failing. Her champions were dead or terrified. She needed a new weapon. She needed someone who could match the boy's skill. someone who could break his spirit. She needed a warrior who knew Cuchulainn's every move, every weakness, every secret. A warrior bound to him by something thicker than blood. She scoured her memory, her network of allies, searching for the one person in all of Ireland who stood a chance. And then a cruel, brilliant smile spread across her face. She had found him. She knew the one man who could and would kill the Hound of Ulster. He was a champion of Connacht now, but he had learned to fight in the very same school, under the very same master as Cuchulainn himself. He was the boy's sworn brother, his closest friend, his only equal. His name was Ferdiad. In the land of shadows on the Isle of Skye, under the brutal tutelage of the warrior queen Scathack, two boys had become men. One was Sétanta, who would become Cú Chulainn. The other was Ferdiad, a prince of the Fir Bolg, a powerful, broad-shouldered warrior with skin of horn that no blade could easily pierce. They were rivals from the first day, pushing each other, testing each other, driving one another to heights neither could have reached alone. They learned the same secret arts of war, the same impossible feats. They mastered the same weapons. And in the crucible of that training, a bond was forged stronger than steel. They became more than rivals, more than friends. They swore an oath of brotherhood, a sacred vow to stand by one another, to protect one another, to be brothers in heart and in arms until the end of their days. Cuchulainn loved only two men in the world without reservation: his foster father Fergus, and his sworn brother Ferdiad. And now, Ferdiad was in the camp of Queen Medb. The Queen of Connacht knew she had found her weapon. Ailill and the other chieftains had failed. Dozens of heroes had fallen at the ford. But Ferdiad was different. He was Cuchulainn's equal. He was his mirror. Medb summoned him to her tent, a place of silken luxury and cold-blooded plotting. She poured him wine, flattered him with praise, spoke of his legend, his strength, his honor. Then she made her offer. "Defeat Cuchulainn," she said, "and you will have riches beyond your dreams. A chariot of the finest yew, rimmed in gold. The vast, fertile plains of Magae, yours to rule forever, free from all tax and tribute. A permanent place of honor at my own table in the halls of Cuchulainn, my own golden ring on your finger. And more than land, more than gold. You will have my daughter, the beautiful Findabair, as your wife. You will be a king's son-in-law. You will be a prince of Connacht." Ferdiad listened, his face a stone mask. He refused. He spoke of his oath, of his love for Cuchulainn. He could not raise a hand against his brother. It was a violation of everything he held sacred. He thanked the queen for her generous offers, but his honor was not for sale. Medb smiled, a slow, venomous curl of her lips. She had expected this. Honor was a wall, and every wall has a crack. She switched her tactics from temptation to poison. She began to taunt him. She told him the men of her army were whispering. They were saying Ferdiad was a coward, that he hid behind his oath because he was terrified of facing the Hound of Ulster in single combat. She told him that Cuchulainn himself had mocked him in the Ulster camp, laughing at the idea that Ferdiad could ever be his true equal. It was a lie, a vicious, calculated lie, but it was the perfect one. Medb leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "He said you were the best of the trainees," she hissed, "but only for practice. He said he always held back just enough so you would not lose heart. He told his men that your friendship was a convenience, a way to keep a dangerous rival close, but never close enough to be a real threat." Every word was a dagger, twisting in the deepest insecurities of a warrior's heart. Ferdiad's pride, the very core of his being, began to crack. Had it been true? All those years had Cuchulainn, his brother, secretly looked down on him? Had their bond been a lie? Medb saw the doubt in his eyes and pressed her advantage. She swore on the gods of her people that what she said was true. She offered him wine laced with herbs to cloud his judgment and inflame his passions. She painted a picture of a glorious future, a kingdom of his own, the most beautiful woman in Ireland as his bride, and the chance to finally, definitively, prove that he was not just Cuchulainn's equal, but his superior. The poison worked. By the time the sun rose, Ferdiad, his heart heavy with a toxic mix of doubt, pride and ambition, had agreed. He would fight. He armed himself for battle. But it was not the joyous ritual of a warrior eager for glory. It was a funeral rite. He donned his silken tunic, his coat of hardened leather, and over it all an apron of iron. On his head he placed a great horned helmet, studded with carbuncles and crystals that shone in the dawn light. At his side, he hung his golden-hilted sword. He took up his massive purple-hued shield, decorated with 50 gleaming bosses of bronze. In his hands he carried 2 great spears, with his javelins and throwing darts close at hand. As he climbed into his chariot, the warriors of Connacht cheered for their new champion, but Ferdiad heard nothing. He was a dead man walking, marching to kill the only brother he had ever known. At the ford, Cuchulainn was recovering from his latest battle when his charioteer, Leg, looked to the south. Leg's eyes were sharper than any other's. He described what he saw: a magnificent warrior in a grand chariot, a hero of immense power and presence, with a great purple shield and a horned helmet. Cuchulainn listened, and his heart sank. He knew that description. He knew that shield. He tried to deny it. "No, Leg," he said, his voice strained. "It must be one of Medb's other champions, trying to impress us with fine armor." But Leg was insistent. He described the warrior's bearing, the way he held his spears, the sheer aura of command. And Cuchulainn could deny it no longer. A wave of grief and cold dread washed over him. "Brother," he whispered, "it is Ferdiad, and he has come to fight me." When Ferdiad's chariot reached the southern bank of the ford, Cuchulainn crossed the water to meet him. There was no war cry, no challenge, only the hollow sound of 2 friends facing their doom. "Welcome, Ferdiad," Cuchulainn said, his voice thick with sorrow. "I am sorry to see you here. You should not have come. You should not have listened to the promises of that woman." "I had to come, Cuchulainn," Ferdiad replied, his own voice tight with regret. "A man must follow his own path to glory. You have had yours. Now I will have mine." "What glory is there in this?" Cuchulainn pleaded. "In fighting your own brother? In breaking the sacred oath we swore to Scathach? Turn back, Ferdiad. Go home. I will face 100 of Medb's champions, but I will not raise a hand against you." But Ferdiad was trapped. He had given his word to Medb. To turn back now would be to brand himself a coward in the eyes of all Ireland. The lie had taken root too deep. "It is too late for words," he said, his eyes hard but his heart breaking. "We are here to fight." And so the duel began. The first day was a spectacle of martial perfection. They began with their throwing spears and their shields. For hours they cast and parried, their movements a perfect, deadly mirror of one another. Every feint, every block, every throw was a shared memory from their training days. They knew each other's every move before it was made. Not a single spear found its mark. Their skill was so perfectly matched. It was as if one man was fighting his own reflection. When the throwing spears were exhausted, they moved to their straight spears, fighting on foot in the shallow water of the ford. The clash of ash and bronze echoed across the valley. They fought with a grim, terrible beauty, their movements fluid and precise. But still, neither could gain an advantage. They were 2 halves of a whole, and they could not break one another. As dusk fell, they lowered their weapons, exhausted. The battle was not over. They embraced, a stiff, sorrowful gesture. They gave each other 3 kisses on the cheek. They sent their chariots to the same paddock, their horses grazing side by side. Their charioteers shared the same fire. That night, Cuchulainn sent half of his food and healing herbs across the ford to Ferdiad's camp. And Ferdiad, in turn, sent half of his own to Cuchulainn. For one more night they were brothers. But they both knew that when the sun rose again, they would return to the water. And one of them would not walk away. The morning light broke cold and grey over the ford. The armies of Ireland, silent as a forest of stone, watched from the bank. Ferdiad was the first to arrive, a giant clad in iron, his horned helmet obscuring his face. He was no longer a brother. He was an instrument of the Queen, a champion of Connacht. Then Cuchulainn came, smaller, more compact, but with an energy that seemed to crackle in the air around him. They met in the center of the stream, the water swirling around their ankles. For a long moment they just stood there. Ferdiad spoke first, his voice a low rumble. "What weapons shall we use today, little brother?" The words were meant to sting, a reminder of their difference in size, a jab at their shared past. Cuchulainn's reply was sharp. "The choice is yours until nightfall. You arrived first. Then we will use our 8-bladed javelins," Ferdiad declared. and our ivory-hilted swords. And so it began. They fought with the deadly grace of those who had learned the art of war from the same master. They moved like dancers, a lethal ballet of feints, parries, and thrusts. Every move Cuchulainn made, Ferdiad anticipated. Every attack Ferdiad launched, Cuchulainn deflected. They were mirrors of each other, two halves of a single perfect warrior. Their javelins flew like angry wasps, each one caught on the other's shield. Their swords rang out, a constant, sharp percussion in the morning air. They were so evenly matched that the watching armies could not tell who had the upper hand. They fought until the sun began to dip below the horizon, until their arms ached and their bodies were a canvas of shallow cuts and bruises. As darkness fell, they threw down their weapons, and in the middle of that blood-stained water, they embraced. They kissed each other 3 times on the cheek. Their chariot drivers brought their horses to the same paddock and shared a fire. That night the healers came. Cuchulainn sent his to Ferdiad, and Ferdiad sent his to Cuchulainn. They tended to each other's wounds, applying herbs and balms with the same care they had once shown each other in the halls of Scathach. They shared food and drink, and for a few precious hours the war was forgotten. But the dawn came again, and again they met in the ford. "What weapons today, Ferdiad?" Cuchulainn asked, his voice heavy. "Today," Ferdiad answered, his eyes hard, "we use the great, heavy spears for the chariot fight. Today we will see which of us is the better horseman." The battle that day was a storm of thundering hoofs and splintering wood. Their chariots crashed together like waves breaking on a cliff. They hurled the heavy throwing spears with such force that the shafts shattered and the iron heads screamed through the air. The fight was faster, more brutal than the day before. The wounds they inflicted were deeper, the rage more real. Ferdiad, being the larger man, began to gain an advantage. He drove Cuchulainn back step by step, his spear finding its mark again and again. Cuchulainn was bleeding, his body screaming in protest, but he would not yield. He fought with the fury of a cornered animal, his warp-spasm threatening to ignite, his battle light beginning to glow around his head. Again the sun set. Again they stopped. But this time the embrace was shorter, the kisses more hesitant. The mood around their shared campfire was somber. The wounds were too deep for simple herbs. Their horses were tended, but they stood apart, sensing the animosity that now hung between their masters. That night, as they sat in silence, the whispers from Queen Medb's camp reached Ferdiad's ears. Promises of glory, of land, of her own daughter's hand in marriage. Poisonous words that stoked the fires of his ambition and smothered the last embers of his love for his brother. On the third morning, Cuchulainn saw the change in Ferdiad's eyes. The warmth was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He knew this was the last day. One way or another it would end here. "The choice of weapons is yours, Cuchulainn," Ferdiad said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "Then today," Cuchulainn replied, his own voice low and grim, "we fight to the death. We fight on foot, in the water with our heavy swords." He added a final desperate plea. "Or we could walk away, Ferdiad. We could turn our backs on these queens and kings and be brothers again." Ferdiad just shook his head. "It is too late for that." The fight that day was not a duel. It was a butchering. All pretense of skill and artistry was gone, replaced by a desperate, primal need to survive. They hacked and slashed at each other, their swords chipping on bone, the water around them turning a deep, churning red. Cuchulainn was smaller, quicker, but Ferdiad's size and strength were overwhelming. He wore a special armor of horned stone that no sword could pierce, and he used his massive shield to batter Cuchulainn, to drive him down into the water. Cuchulainn was drowning, choking on river water and his own blood. He was losing. The Hound of Ulster, the undefeated champion, was being systematically dismantled by the one man he had ever truly loved. From the bank, his charioteer leg could see it happening, and he screamed at his master, his voice filled with fury and shame. "He is beating you like a washerwoman beats laundry at the stones. He is crushing you like a reed. He will boast of your defeat for the rest of his days, you pathetic little ferryman." The words were a lash, a calculated insult designed to do one thing: unleash the beast. And it worked. A tremor ran through Cuchulainn. His body began to contort. The warp-spasm, the ríastrad, took him. His hair stood on end like bristles, each with a drop of blood at its tip. One eye sucked back into his skull, the other bulged out red and raw. His mouth stretched from ear to ear, his battle scream a sound that was not human, a sound that made both armies recoil in terror. He was no longer Cú Chulainn, he was a monster. He rose from the water, a terrifying apparition, and drove Ferdiad back. But even in his monstrous state, his sword could not find a way through Ferdiad's enchanted armor. Ferdiad, though terrified, stood his ground, his own great strength keeping the monster at bay. Cú Chulainn knew there was only one way to end this. He had one weapon, a gift from Scathach that he had never used. A weapon of last resort, so terrible that she had only taught its use to him. He called out to Leg, "The Gae Bolg, throw it to me." Leg sent the weapon floating down the stream. It looked like a simple barbed spear, but its secret was horrific. Ferdiad saw it coming. He lowered his shield to protect his lower body. It was the exact move Cú Chulainn was waiting for. With a flick of his wrist, Cú Chulainn threw his own spear over Ferdiad's shield, wounding him in the chest. As Ferdiad instinctively raised his shield to block the high attack, Cú Chulainn caught the Gae Bolg with his foot. He kicked it upward under the shield, under the armor, driving it deep into Ferdiad's unprotected belly. The Gae Bolg entered a man as a single point, but once inside, it exploded into 30 barbs, shredding every organ, filling every vein and artery with its poison spines. There was no defense. There was no cure. Ferdiad's eyes went wide with shock. Then with a terrible understanding, he dropped his sword. "That is enough," he whispered, the life already draining from him. "I die by that, little brother." He collapsed forward, and Cú Chulainn, the warp-spasm receding as quickly as it came, caught him. He carried his brother's broken body out of the red water and laid him gently on the northern bank, on the side of Ulster. He was home. Cú Chulainn stood over the man he had just killed, and a wave of grief so profound it threatened to shatter him washed over him. He looked at Ferdiad's pale face, at the golden pin in his hair, at the fine silk of his tunic, now soaked in blood. He saw the ring on Ferdiad's finger, a gift from Med, the price of his loyalty. Cú Chulainn tore it off and threw it away. Then he began to weep. He lamented their shared childhood, their training with Scathach, their vow of eternal friendship. It was all a game, he cried out to the silent armies, his voice breaking. It was all a game until Ferdiad came. He fell to his knees, cradling his friend's head in his lap, oblivious to his own horrific wounds, lost in a sorrow so complete that it blotted out the sun. The great champion of Ulster had won the day, but in doing so he had lost a part of his soul. For 3 days and 3 nights he did not move. He held Ferdiad's body in the blood-stained water, speaking to him as if he could still hear. He spoke of their time in the Alps, training under the warrior woman Scathach. He remembered their oath, sworn as boys, that they would never raise a weapon against one another. He cursed the gold and the silver, the false promises of a jealous queen that had turned brother against brother. His charioteer, Leg, pleaded with him, telling him his wounds were festering, that he would die right there in the ford if he didn't move. But Cú Chulainn was deaf to him. The world had shrunk to this single terrible point of failure. It wasn't a battle he had won. It was an argument he had lost. He had failed to save his friend from his own pride, and now the price was paid in blood. He lamented, his voice raw and broken. "It was all a game to us," he cried out to the unhearing sky. "A game of glory and of fame until today. Oh Ferdiad, your shield will protect no one now. Your sword will win no more renown. Your death is a cloud that will forever darken my sun." Finally, Leg, seeing his master fading, had to physically unpry his fingers from Ferdiad's armor. He lifted the champion of Ulster, a man who seemed to weigh nothing now, a hollowed-out shell of grief, and carried him from the water. Cú Chulainn, for the first time in his life, did not resist. He was broken. They laid him on a bed of rushes, far from the din of the enemy camp. The healers of Ulster, the finest physicians in the land, came to tend to him. They looked upon his body and despaired. He was more wound than man. From the crown of his head to the soles of his feet, there was not a spot the size of a pinhead that wasn't bruised or cut or pierced. The fury of the ríastrad, his battle warp, had sustained him through the combat, but now, in the quiet aftermath, the catastrophic toll it took on his body was laid bare. His joints were dislocated, his muscles torn, his skin a roadmap of agony. They washed his wounds with wine and herbs, murmuring incantations to knit flesh and bone. But they knew the deepest wounds were the ones they could not see. The light in his eyes was gone. The hero who had single-handedly held back an entire army now lay as helpless as a newborn. As Cuchulainn lay hovering between life and death, a strange figure appeared by his bedside. He was tall and radiant, with a face like the sun at noon, and he carried a spear that pulsed with a faint inner light. This was no mortal man. This was Luff of the Long Arm, a god among the Tuatha De Danann, and Cuchulainn's divine father. He had watched from the otherworld as his son fought and bled for Ulster, and he could watch no longer. He bent over the broken hero and spoke softly, his voice like the humming of the stars. He told Cuchulainn to sleep, to let go of his grief and his pain, for he, Luff, would take his place. He would guard the fort against Medb's army, and allow his son the time he needed to heal. Luff applied magical herbs from the otherworld to Cuchulainn's wounds, and a deep dreamless sleep fell upon the champion. For 3 days and 3 nights, the same length of time he had mourned Ferdiad, Cuchulainn slept a divine sleep. While he rested, his godly father strode to the battlefield. He took on Cuchulainn's appearance and stood guard. Medb's scouts would approach, see the fearsome figure of the Hound of Ulster standing there, seemingly untouched by his duel with Ferdiad, and they would retreat in terror. Luff cast spells of confusion and fear over the Connacht camp, making them see phantom armies in the mists, turning them against each other in the dark. He gave Ulster the one thing it desperately needed: time. But in the capital of Emain Machu, patience was wearing thin. The curse of Machu was finally lifting from the men of Ulster. Strength was returning to their limbs, clarity to their minds. But the full army under King Concobar was not yet ready to march. The news of Cuchulainn's stand, and of his terrible duel with Ferdiad, had reached the city. And it reached the ears of the boy troop. This was a company of 300 youths, the sons of Ulster's nobles, training to be the next generation of Red Branch Knights. They were Cuchulainn's successors, boys who had grown up on tales of his glory. He was their idol, their hero, and they heard he was wounded, perhaps dying, holding back the enemy alone. Their young hearts, full of more courage than sense, could not bear it. Their leader, a fiery youth named Fálamain, the son of King Concobar himself, stood before them. He declared that it was a disgrace for them to sit safely behind the city walls while their champion bled for them. They would not wait for their fathers. They would not wait for the main army. They would march out themselves and face the invaders. They would show Queen Med the strength of Ulster's future. It was a glorious, foolish, and heartbreaking decision. They polished their light shields, sharpened their practiced swords, and gathered their small chariots. 300 boys, none older than 17, singing their war songs, marched out of Emain Machu to face a veteran army of thousands. Queen Med, when her scouts reported the advance, laughed. She thought it was a joke, some sort of trick. But as the small company drew closer, she saw they were just children. She felt a moment's pity, and offered them a chance to surrender, to join her side and be spared. Fálamain, the boy king's son, shouted back his defiance. "Ulster does not surrender," he yelled, his voice cracking with youth and pride. "And we have come to avenge our brother, Cuchulainn." Med sighed. She had not wanted this. But war is war. She gave the order. The battle, if you could call it that, was a massacre. The boys fought with the ferocity of cornered lions. They drove their chariots into the ranks of hardened warriors, slashing and stabbing, fighting with a suicidal bravery that stunned the Connacht army. For a brief, glorious moment they pushed the invaders back. But they were hopelessly outnumbered and outmatched. One by one they fell. Fálamain was surrounded and cut down. The last of the boy troop died, forming a circle around his body, fighting to the very last breath. By sunset, all 300 were dead. The news of the slaughter traveled like a shockwave back through Ulster. It reached the camp where Cuchulainn lay in his enchanted sleep. The story was told in a hushed whisper, so as not to wake him. But the grief was so immense, the tragedy so profound, that it pierced the veil of Luff's magic. Cuchulainn's eyes snapped open. The first thing he asked was, "What was that noise?" It sounded like the world breaking. His charioteer, Leg, with tears streaming down his face, told him of the boy troop. He told him how the next generation of Ulster's heroes had marched to their deaths for him. Something inside Cuchulainn finally shattered. The grief for Ferdiad had broken his heart. But the news of the boy troop's sacrifice ignited his soul. He rose from his bed. The wounds Luff had treated were gone. His body was whole, stronger than ever before. But his face was a mask of cold, terrible fury. This was no longer about honor or a stolen bull. This was about vengeance. Medb had not just invaded his land. She had not just killed his brother. She had now stolen Ulster's future. He called for his armor. He called for his chariot, the sickle chariot. The time for single combat was over. The time for duels at the ford was done. The Hound of Ulster was about to be unleashed, and this time, he would not stop until the entire army of Ireland was a red ruin at his feet. His charioteer leg cracked the whip, and the horses screamed, not in fear, but in a kind of berserk ecstasy, their own battle fury rising to meet their masters. And as the chariot began to move, something inside Cuchulainn finally, irrevocably, broke. A shudder ran through him, a violent spasm that began in his feet and shot up his spine like a lightning strike. This was not the controlled rage of a warrior. This was the ríastrad, the warp-spasm. His body began to twist in its skin. His muscles swelled and knotted into grotesque lumps, his feet and knees swiveling to face backwards. One of his eyes was sucked so deep into his skull that a crane could not have plucked it out, while the other bulged from its socket, vast and red and raw, sitting on his cheek. His mouth stretched in an impossible grin, pulling back from his jaw until his gullet was visible, and from his throat a roar erupted, not of a man, but of something far older and more terrible, like a lion and a demon combined. His hair shot up from his scalp like the spines of a sea urchin, and on the tip of every single strand, a tiny spark of fire glowed, or a drop of his own boiling blood. A column of dark, vaporous blood, the height of a ship's mast, erupted from the crown of his head, creating a grim and terrible halo in the twilight. He was no longer a boy. He was no longer a man. He was a monster, a god of slaughter made flesh. And the sickle chariot began to roll. It was a weapon designed for one purpose: annihilation. From its axles spun long, curved scythes sharpened to a razor's edge. Iron spikes and javelins jutted out from every angle. It wasn't a vehicle. It was a meat grinder on wheels, and it was aimed at the heart of the largest army ever assembled on Irish soil. The first impact was not a clash of arms. It was a sound of pure destruction, like a rockslide hitting a butcher's shop. The front ranks of Medb's army simply disappeared. They were not cut down. They were pureed. The scythes, spinning at furious speed, turned men and horses into a red mist. For every yard the chariot traveled, a dozen men died, their bodies thrown into the air in pieces, their limbs severed and scattered across the field. Leg, the charioteer, drove with inhuman skill, weaving a path of maximum carnage, his whip cracking like thunder, his voice screaming encouragement to his berserker lord. Cuchulainn stood in the lurching chariot, a spinning vortex of death. He was no longer using a sword or a spear with any precision. He was a force of nature. He swung his weapons in wide, indiscriminate arcs, and everything they touched was obliterated. Shields shattered like pottery, helmets caved in, and men were cleaved in two from head to groin. The army of Ireland, so confident just moments before, broke into pure animal panic. How do you fight this? How do you form a shield wall against a hurricane? How do you stand your ground against a demon who seems to heal from his wounds by bathing in the blood of his enemies? They couldn't. They ran. But there was nowhere to go. The sickle chariot was faster than any man on foot, faster than most horses. It plowed through the fleeing masses, carving bloody lanes through their ranks. Cuchulainn drove them towards the rivers, the fords where he had fought his single combats, but there would be no more honor here. He drove the first wave of terrified soldiers into the ford of the Watch, and there he fell upon them. The water churned and frothed, turning from clear to pink to a deep, thick crimson. He slaughtered them in the shallows until the sheer number of bodies, both men and horses, piled up so high that they dammed the river, creating a grisly bridge of the dead that stretched from one bank to the other. The river, it was said, ran level with its banks, choked with the corpses of Medb's champions. But he wasn't done. He turned his attention to the next ford. He herded another great mass of soldiers, driving them with terror, and repeated the slaughter. And then a third time. 3 fords, once symbols of his heroic stand, were now monuments to his monstrous fury, each one clogged and overflowing with the ruins of an army. The plain of Merthium was no longer a battlefield. It was a charnel house. He had built 3 terrible mounds, each one higher than the last. A mound of hands and feet, a mound of shields and weapons, and a third highest of all, a mound of heads. 100 heads for every day he had held the border alone. From a hill overlooking the massacre, Queen Medb watched in abject horror. This was not war. This was an extermination. She saw her finest warriors, her allied kings, her entire grand ambition, being systematically dismantled by a single possessed teenager in a bladed chariot. Her army, which had darkened the horizon that morning, was now a terrified mob, melting away before her eyes like snow in a furnace. The great brown bull of Cooley, the prize for which all this blood was being shed, seemed a pathetic and meaningless trinket now. She screamed at her generals, at her druids, at anyone who would listen. "Stop him! You must stop him!" But they could only stare, their faces pale with a terror that went beyond the fear of death. They were witnessing something that defied the laws of men. They were watching a myth come to life, and it was a myth written in their own blood. Cuchulainn raged across the field for hours. He was a whirlwind of destruction, seemingly tireless, a being of pure, unadulterated violence. But even a demigod has his limits. As the sun began to set, casting long bloody shadows across the field of corpses, the ríastrad began to fade. The monstrous form began to recede. The bulging eye sank back into his skull, the twisted limbs straightened, the fire in his hair died out, and what was left was a boy. A 17-year-old boy, so covered in wounds that his own skin was not visible beneath the crisscross of cuts and gashes. His famous gray cloak was stiff and black with dried blood. He was slumped in his chariot, barely able to stand, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He had saved Ulster. He had single-handedly broken the back of the invading army, but the cost was etched into every inch of his body. He was a ruin of a man, held together only by adrenaline and a supernatural will. Leg turned the exhausted horses and began the slow, grim journey back to the Ulster encampment, leaving behind a silence broken only by the groans of the dying. The great army of Ireland was shattered, but not entirely destroyed. They had been routed, humiliated, decimated, but Medb was still alive. And as she looked out over the wasteland her invasion had become, her terror slowly, surely, began to curdle into a new kind of resolve, a colder, darker, more venomous kind of hatred. She finally understood. She could not defeat Cuchulainn with an army. She couldn't overwhelm him with numbers or champions. He was not a man you could kill on a battlefield. He was a force, an idea, a legend. And you don't kill a legend with a sword. You kill it with poison, with treachery, with magic. She realized she had to break not his body but his spirit. She had to attack the very things that made him who he was. His honor, his vows, his hayas. And for that, she would need a weapon far more terrible than any sickle chariot. She would need the children of Cattle, the twisted sorcerers whose father Cuchulainn had slain, and who now thirsted for a vengeance that would be paid not in blood, but in the hero's very soul. They were a brood of nightmares, born of a sorcerer's rage and forged in the fires of vengeance. After Cuchulainn had cut down their father, Cattle, and his 27 sons in single combat, a dark miracle occurred. Catten's wife had been pregnant, and she gave birth not to one child, but to 3 sons and 3 daughters, each one a vessel for the family's collective hatred. Medb, seeing her opportunity, sent them away. They traveled to the shadowed corners of the world, to Babylon and beyond, learning every forbidden art, every twisted incantation, every foul spell that could warp the mind and poison the soul. They returned to Ireland not as warriors, but as something far worse. They were living illusions, masters of deceit who could conjure phantoms from thin air, and weave lies that felt more real than truth. Their target was not Cuchulainn's body, but the very foundation of his being. His honor, his vows, his mind. Their campaign began not with a clash of steel, but with a whisper on the wind. From their hidden encampment, the children of Cattle began to weave their great illusion. They conjured the sounds of a vast army marching on a main macha. They made the air itself scream with the cries of dying women and children. They painted the sky with the smoke of phantom fires, creating a vision of Ulster burning, its people being slaughtered while their greatest champion rested. The magic was so potent, so deeply insidious, that the very stones of the fortress seemed to cry out in alarm. It was a lie made of pure malice, designed for one man and one man alone. Inside the walls, Cuchulainn heard the chaos. His warriors' blood ignited. Ulster was under attack and he was not there. He called for his armor, his sword, his spear, his sickle chariot. But as he prepared for war, a wall of people stood before him. His wife, Emer, begged him not to go, her eyes filled with a terror that went beyond the fear of battle. His mother, Deichton, clung to him, pleading that this was a phantom, a trick. But the most powerful voice of all was Cathbad, the chief druid of Ulster. He knew this was not the work of men. He felt the dark, foreign magic polluting the air. He told Cuchulainn, "This is not real. It is an illusion, a lie woven to draw you out to your doom. Wait but a single day, and it will fade." To prove his point, Cathbad summoned his own druidic powers. He cast a spell of peace over Emain Macha, muffling the phantom screams and clearing the illusory smoke. For a moment there was silence. Cuchulainn hesitated, the frantic urgency in his heart beginning to cool. But the children of Calatin were watching. They doubled their efforts, pouring all their hatred and all their learned power into the illusion. The screams returned louder than before. The phantom armies now seemed to be at the very gates, their war horns blasting a challenge directly at the Hound of Ulster. One of the sorceresses took on the form of Niamh, Cuchulainn's lover, and her voice cried out that she was being dragged away, screaming his name. That was all it took. The illusion was too perfect, the appeal to his duty too strong. He shoved past the druids, past his own mother. He would not listen. To him, ignoring such a cry for help was a betrayal of everything he was. As he stormed towards his chariot, the women of Emain Macha, in a last desperate attempt, brought out all the cauldrons and vats of the fortress, filled them with cold water, and bared their breasts to him, a traditional plea for a warrior to stand down, to not bring war and grief upon them. But even this ancient custom was not enough. Cuchulainn, in his fury, averted his eyes in respect, but did not stop. He was a force of nature, an avalanche of honor and rage, and he was now hurtling towards his own destruction. Only one person could reason with him, his charioteer Leg, but even Leg could not dissuade him. All he could do was prepare the chariot. As he harnessed the two magnificent horses, the Liath Machu and the Dub Sanglend, the Grey of Machu turned away from him 3 times, refusing the harness. Tears of blood streamed from the horses' eyes, a terrible omen of the day to come. Cuchulainn, impatient and enraged, strode over and cursed the animal for its disloyalty. At the sound of its master's voice, the great horse relented, and allowed itself to be harnessed. The doom was set. Cuchulainn leaped into his chariot, and the sickle chariot tore out of Emain Macha, leaving a cloud of dust and unanswered prayers behind. The road to the phantom battle was strangely quiet. The sounds of war that had echoed through Emain Macha were now gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. As they rounded a bend, Cuchulainn saw a strange sight. 3 ancient hags, impossibly old, with skin like wrinkled leather and only one eye each, sat by the side of the road. They were roasting something over a small fire of rowan wood, a wood with powerful magical properties. As he drew closer, the smell hit him, and a cold dread filled his stomach. It was the flesh of a dog. Here the trap was finally sprung. Cuchulainn was bound by his Gisa, the sacred mystical vows that governed his life and gave him his power. To break a Geis was to invite misfortune, even death, and he lived by 2 conflicting vows. He was forbidden from ever refusing a meal offered to him, and he was forbidden from ever eating the flesh of a hound, the very animal that gave him his name. The hags knew this. They were the children of Calatin in disguise. With wicked, knowing smiles, they offered him a piece of the roasted meat. He was caught. To refuse their hospitality would be a grave dishonor, a stain on his name. To accept would be to violate the very essence of his identity as the Hound of Cuchulainn. He stood there for a moment, trapped between 2 unbreakable rules. In the end, his code of honor won out. He could not refuse the offering. He took the piece of dog meat with his left hand and ate it. The moment the flesh passed his lips, a tremor ran through him. A crippling weakness seized the entire left side of his body. His left hand, which held the meat, fell limp at his side. His left leg lost its strength. Half of his power, half of his divine strength, was extinguished in that single fateful bite. He was crippled, but he pressed on, his face a mask of grim determination. He finally arrived at the plain of Muirthemne, his ancestral home. The phantom army was gone. In its place stood the real army, the combined forces of the men of Ireland, gathered by Medb. And at their head were the men who had the deepest reason to hate him. There was Lugaid, son of Cú, the king Cuchulainn had treacherously slain. There was Uch, son of Cairbre, the king he had killed at Tara. And there were the children of Calatin, their illusions now dropped, standing and smiling, their work done. Cuchulainn, half paralyzed, faced them alone. His charioteer leg was by his side, but this was his fight. He knew this was the end. He looked at the vast army and recited a poem of farewell to Ulster, to his family, to the landmarks of his home. Then he charged. Even diminished, he was a terrifying sight. He carved a bloody path through the enemy ranks, his rage fueling what remained of his strength. But his enemies were clever. They wouldn't face him head-on. They knew of a prophecy, a druidic curse laid upon his favorite spear, that every time it was thrown, a king would fall. They decided to use his own honor and his own weapon to kill him. A satirist, a poet of low standing, approached the battle line and called out to Cuchulainn. He demanded the hero's spear. "Give me your spear, Hound, or I will satirize you. I will compose a poem so vile it will raise boils on your face and strip the honor from your name forever. All of Ulster will be shamed because its champion was too miserly to give a poet his spear." For a hero of ancient Ireland, this was a threat worse than death. To be shamed in poetry was to be eternally damned. Cuchulainn, enraged at the insult but bound by his code, snarled, "I have never been shamed for my generosity." With a reluctant flick of his wrist, he threw the spear. It flew through the satirist, killing him instantly, before embedding itself in the ground far behind the enemy lines. The first part of the prophecy was fulfilled. Lugaid sent a warrior to retrieve it. Cuchulainn fought on with his other weapons, but soon a second man, a noble warrior, approached and made the same demand, with the same threat. Again, Cuchulainn was forced to choose between his weapon and his honor. "A king shall fall by this throw," he cried, and hurled the spear. It pierced the warrior and killed his charioteer, leg, Cuchulainn's dearest friend. The king of charioteers was dead. The second part of the prophecy was fulfilled. Another of Lugaid's men retrieved the fated spear. Now Cuchulainn was truly alone, his friend dead at his feet, his body half numb, his spirit beginning to break. A third druid came forward, repeating the demand, threatening to mock and shame not just Cuchulainn, but the entire lineage of the Red Branch warriors. With a final, agonized cry, Cuchulainn threw his spear for the last time. "This throw will kill a king," he roared, and it did, piercing the druid and 9 men behind him. The spear clattered to the ground, and this time it was Lugaid himself, the son of the murdered Cú, who walked forward and picked it up. He held Cuchulainn's own fated weapon in his hands. He looked across the blood-soaked field at the wounded, exhausted, and broken Hound of Ulster. The prophecy had been fulfilled 3 times, and now, the spear that was destined to kill a king was aimed at the uncrowned king of Ireland's heroes. Lugaid raised his arm, the weapon humming with a terrible, patient magic, ready to complete the circle of vengeance. The spear flew. It did not whistle through the air. It tore a hole in it, a screaming, invisible wound in the sky. It was not aimed at Cuchulainn's heart or his head. It was aimed at his very essence, the core of his being. The hero, slumped in his chariot, his guts literally held in by his own hands, saw it coming. But there was no warp-spasm left, no divine speed to pluck it from the air. There was only acceptance. The spear struck him in the gut, the same place where his own Gae Bolg had once fatally wounded his son. It punched through his body with sickening force, pinning him to the back of his chariot and tearing his intestines from their last desperate hold. The world, which had been a blur of red and gray, snapped into a horrifying final clarity. He saw the faces of his enemies, a mixture of triumph and terror. He saw the sky a cold, indifferent blue. And he saw his own lifeblood, pooling on the chariot floor. But the Hound of Ulster would not die like this. He would not die on his back, a broken thing for his enemies to gloat over. With a roar that was more will than breath, he ripped the spear from his body. Blood erupted, a final, defiant fountain. He stumbled from the chariot, his legs barely holding him, and staggered towards a nearby pillar stone, a tall granite sentinel that had stood for ages. His charioteer leg was dead. His horse, the Grey of Machu, was dying nearby, fighting to the last. He was utterly alone. He reached the stone, his hand smearing it with his own blood. He looked back at the army of his enemies. They watched, frozen, not daring to approach. Was this another trick? Another manifestation of his terrifying battle frenzy? They could not be sure. Cuchulainn took his belt and, with the last dregs of his impossible strength, he tied himself to the pillar stone. He would not fall. He would not kneel. He would meet his end on his feet, sword in hand, facing those who had brought him down. He arranged his hair over his shoulder, so that even in death, the glory of it would be seen. He fixed his gaze on the horizon towards Amain Machu, towards home. And there, bound to the stone, the life finally began to fade from the eyes of Ireland's greatest champion. For 3 days his enemies did not move. They watched the silent figure, upright and defiant, his dead eyes still seeming to hold a spark of that terrible light. They were paralyzed by fear. The legend of Cuchulainn was so potent, so overwhelming, that even his corpse held an army at bay. They could not believe he was truly gone. They waited for the warp-spasm, for the earth-shattering roar, for the hero light to blaze from his head one last time. But it never came. Finally, on the 3rd day, a raven, one of the Morrigan's dark messengers, flew down from the blood-gray sky. It circled the pillar stone once, twice, then landed upon Cuchulainn's shoulder and began to peck at his flesh. This was the signal. The great hero was dead. The magic was gone. Only then did Lugaid Mac Conroy dare to approach. With a trembling hand he took Cuchulainn's sword and, fulfilling his vow, he cut off the hero's head. As he did, the sword fell from Cuchulainn's dead hand, landing on Lugaid's own and severing his right hand at the wrist. Even in death the Hound bit back. Lugaid then took the hero's severed right hand as well, a final trophy of his vengeance. But the story does not end there. Because Cuchulainn had a sworn brother, another of the Red Branch Knights named Conall Cernach, Conall the Victorious. They had made a pact, a blood oath. Whoever among them was killed first, the other would avenge him before the sun set on that very day. Conall had been away, but when he saw the Grey of Machu, riderless and bleeding from 30 wounds, stumble back to Amain Machu to die at the foot of his master's door, he knew, and a cold, calculating fury descended upon him. Conall's vengeance was not a fiery explosion like the ríastrad. It was a storm of ice and steel. He tracked Lugaid and the celebrating army. When he found them, he did not challenge them all. He sought out Lugaid. He saw that Lugaid now had only one hand, thanks to Cuchulainn's final act of defiance. To make the combat fair, Conall Cernach placed one of his own hands in his belt, fighting Lugaid one-handed. The duel was short and brutal. Conall was called the Victorious for a reason. He cut Lugaid down, and as Lugaid lay dying, he asked Conall to add his head to Cuchulainn's on the pillar stone, so he could have the glory of appearing taller than his foe in death. Conall obliged. Then he began to hunt. He pursued the children of Cuchulainn, the sorcerers who had woven the web of Cuchulainn's doom. One by one he found them. One by one he took their heads. His oath was absolute. His revenge complete. The blood price for the son of Luff had been paid in full. So why, after 2,000 years, do we still tell this story? Why does the name Cuchulainn still echo with such power? It's because he is more than a hero. He is an archetype. He is the tragic champion. The man blessed with divine gifts but cursed by fate. He is the embodiment of a warrior's glory and a warrior's sorrow. He sacrificed everything, his friends, his son, his own life, in the name of duty and honor. He was a force of nature, but he was also profoundly human, driven by love, rage, and a deep, aching loyalty. His story is not just a myth. It is woven into the very fabric of Ireland itself. Fast forward 2 millennia from the Bronze Age battles to the streets of Dublin in 1916. A group of Irish rebels seized the General Post Office, making a stand against the might of the British Empire in what would become known as the Easter Rising. Their leader, Patrick Pearse, was a fervent admirer of Cuchulainn. He saw in the ancient hero the ultimate symbol of Irish defiance, of glorious, selfless sacrifice for the nation. Today, if you go to that same post office in Dublin, you will find a bronze statue. It is not of Pearse, or any of the other leaders of the Rising. It is a statue of a dying Cuchulainn, bound to a pillar stone, a raven on his shoulder, his head bowed in death but his body unbroken. He became the symbol of a modern nation's struggle for freedom, the spirit of a people who would rather die on their feet than live on their knees. The story of Cú Chulainn endures because it speaks to the fundamental conflicts within all of us: the struggle between fate and free will, the clash between personal desire and public duty, the terrible price of violence, and the unbreakable bonds of loyalty. It's a story that reminds us that our greatest strengths are often the source of our deepest flaws, that glory is fleeting, and that even the brightest lights must eventually be extinguished. But it also tells us that how you face that end matters, that there is a power in defiance, a nobility in sacrifice, and a legacy that can be forged in a single final act of will. Cuchulainn, the Hound of Ulster, the hero of the Red Branch, is dead, but his story, his spirit, is immortal. It lives on, not just in the ancient manuscripts or in bronze statues, but in the heart of anyone who has ever dared to stand against impossible odds for something they believe in. And it asks us a timeless question: what is the measure of a life, and what legend will you leave behind?